Good morning. Welcome to the Horseman's University. This morning we're going to do a little classroom session, and what I want to talk to you about is different amounts of anxiety in horses. And I used to, if I showed up for a jump lesson or I taught a jump lesson, and somebody might say, is the horse relaxed and ready to jump? And I used to think of that as sort of a yes or no answer, like the horses are relaxed or they're not relaxed. But now I think of it as having a huge spectrum of how relaxed a horse can be or how tense a horse can be. And obviously there's like an infinite number of levels in that spectrum. But just to kind of make it simpler in my mind, I've kind of broken it down to a few different sort of tipping points. And I sort of have an idea in my mind of a scale of 1 to 10. So let's make our scale just up and down this way. I'll just move my coffee mug a little bit. And let's say down here is 0. And to me, 0 is like they're not necessarily asleep, since this is an awake scale. But their eyes are a little droopy. Their head is low. Their tail is still. There's maybe like a hot day, and it's just like they're almost sort of like daydreaming, and they're just standing there. So. You can maybe see 0 at the walk and maybe at the trot, but it's not something that you're going to have a lot of energy with in your horse. Like we want to have a little bit of, at the beginning, even a 1, it's not necessarily an anxiety, but it's an awakeness and it's an alertness. And then once we get up to 10, this would be a horse that's blind with fear. All right. And I've only seen this rarely in my life, but I have seen a horse that actually killed himself because he was so blind with fear that he ran into a fence post and impaled himself on that. And it was a horrible thing to see. And I think we really want to try to avoid, obviously, getting up that high in any situation. Now, in the middle here, this is a 5. This is where I would really try to avoid ever riding a horse that's above a 5. I've seen people, and I myself have probably ridden horses at like a 6 or a 7, but that starts to get pretty dangerous. The horse, you ask them to slow down, and they don't. They're constantly reacting things. They're constantly that nervousness is really starting to tip towards fear at that point, at a 7. Now 3 here. Around a 3, this is sort of like a tipping point for me. Around a 3 would be like a lower level of anxiety, but it would be like a great example for a lot of horses that I see, like a sort of an off-the-track thoroughbred or a young horse or a jumping horse. To me, if you're trotting around on the buckle, what I mean by that is like a long loopy rein, and you're trotting around and the horse, out of their own anxiety, keeps breaking into the canter. To me, that horse should be probably just tipping above a 3. If they're trotting around and the rhythm just gets a little quick, but they don't actually break to the canter, then they're probably around a 3. And a horse, for me, has definitely got to be below a 3 in order to learn effectively. And when I'm working with a horse, when I'm training a horse, when they're learning new things, when they're in new situations, I take them cross-country schooling or to a lesson or to a horse show, I think oftentimes you'll get a horse, above a 1. A 1 is a nice place, but they'll get up to around a 1.5 or 2 or 2.5. And I think that's okay as long as you keep being aware of, for your horse in particular, and also horses in general, how long it takes for them to relax again at the end of the session. So, for example, let's say I take my horse cross-country schooling, and I go to a new place, and I know my horse well enough that say, if I take him to this new place, it's a cold morning, there's going to be probably some other horses out there schooling, it's going to take my horse, 45 minutes just to be below a 3. Then I make sure I give my horse 45 minutes at least, probably give myself a little margin of error, maybe give them even an hour, to be out there before I have to leave and go home again, because I don't want to get there, have my horse be above a 3, they're not relaxed, they're still dancing around, and then I go home again. And if it takes them this long, I'm going to go cross-country schooling, and I'm not even going to jump anything. You know, like, I think it's a hard thing to do if you don't have a lot of cross-country schooling areas near you. You know, I know it used to be where I grew up, sometimes we'd have to ship for an hour, you pay $50, and you really feel like if you drive that way, you want to get your money's worth and you want to jump something. But I think it's so important that if you're doing something above a 3, you know, you may be doing piaffe or passage, you may be doing flying changes, you may be jumping cross-country jumps or show jumps, you may be working on trail loading. But if they're doing it up here, they're probably just doing it. They're not really learning it, and they're at least not learning it effectively. And this is exactly why I say sometimes when I get a new horse in, or a horse that has a lot of baggage in their life, is I'll spend the first few months with that horse just getting them in a state of mind to learn before I'll actually start teaching them anything. So with some horses, you know, like I'll see this with some horses, it'll take me to where I can consistently be below a 3 on a day-to-day basis. It'll take me a few months, maybe a month and a half of groundwork, and then another maybe month of riding, where just in those, you know, by the end of those 2 months, I'm just sort of towards the end of every session getting them below a 3. But really I want to feel like almost my entire session can be below a 3. I think it's the same with people. Like when we put ourselves in new situations, when we put ourselves out of our comfort zone, when we put ourselves like in front of a crowd of people, for example, often our level of anxiety will go up a little bit, and that's not necessarily bad. I think even sometimes we'll perform better when we have, you know, when we have those butterflies in our stomach. But I do think that if you have a constant tension, a constant simmering, you know, horses can get ulcers, people can get stressed, and that long-term stress, I think, is very, very unhealthy. So I just want you to be aware of this scale. Try to keep your horse below a 2. If they start creeping up towards this 3, my personal rule that I try to stick to is if they're above a 3 that day, or in that situation, I'm not going to try to get my horse on the bit. I'm not going to jump them. I'm going to take as much time as it takes to get them below a 3 before I quit for the day. So in some of the videos that we have going forward, I may say, hey, that horse is above a 3, we're going to really back off, maybe do some groundwork, or that horse is around a 2 or a 1. And this is just my scale. I don't know anybody else that has the exact same scale, but it might help you in the way that you think about your horse. And if your scale is slightly different, that's okay too. So when you're thinking about this scale, you know, there's all kinds of things that show more anxiety, and there's all kinds of things that show more relaxation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up on the board some of those things. I'm going to put over here anxiety. I'm going to put over here relaxation. You know, and there's a lot of these things that'll come up, but let's see if we can think of a few together. So here the horse would be quick. Here the horse would be slower and in a rhythm. Here the head would be high. Here the head might be low. You know, and a nice kind of tipping point is when the pole is below the withers. It's a nice habit for your horse to get into. Here sometimes you can feel the horse's heart rate. If you're riding, you can even feel it through the saddle sometimes. Here the heart rate would be lower. How happy they are to stand still. You know, a horse that's more relaxed is going to be happier standing still. A horse that's anxious, they're going to want to constantly keep moving. A more subtle thing is licking and chewing. I think as a horse relaxes, as a horse goes from a sort of maybe a 2 to a 1.5, and then again as they go from 1.5 to a 1 or a 1 to a half, they might lick and chew. So licking and chewing, I think, doesn't necessarily happen when they're relaxed, but it happens as they're relaxing. What else? We might see with a horse that's more relaxed, we might see more blinking. You know, we might see that wide-eyed look in a horse with more anxiety. Another one that we'll see with an anxious horse is tail swishing. Here we'd see a stiller tail. Another common thing we'd see with a horse that has anxiety is we'd see tense muscles. And you can see that in all different parts of the horses. A common place we might see it is in the neck. The head might be high and the neck might be braced. You know, that brace that we'll see in different places is something that we want to try to avoid for sure. So there's all kinds of things to look for. You know, a horse with a bit in its mouth, they might be moving that bit around, kind of not in a licking and chewing or a soft way, but constantly fidgeting with their bit. That's another sign of anxiety. So just be aware of all these things, and maybe there's some more that you can think of yourself, and see how they apply to the scale for you and for your horse in particular. If you have any questions about this, or if you have anything to add, let me know. And keep watching the Horseman's University, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.